Okay, so now that we have the fighter created, it's time to create the rogue. And as I've stated prior, I'm going to take a Tabaxi Rogue, and I've decided the background is going to be the criminal background. So to create another character, once again, you just click on this little plus, it'll create a new item, and you'll see an empty icon up there again. And now it's time to roll the stats. Now, Tabaxis get a +2 to dexterity and a +1 to their charisma. And stealth and deception are the skills they get from the background. And their primary saving throws are dexterity and intelligence. And you get to choose 4 from this particular list here. All right. So, before, we just simply went through and created a die roll by going and picking up the dice, right-clicking 3 additional times to get those 4 dice, and I forgot to explain that during the first video, and then dragging that and saving that into a particular spot down here. But the Unity version of Fantasy Grounds introduces a whole new way to do this, or at least some additional ways to do this, I should say. Excuse me. Prior to Fantasy Grounds Unity, when it came to actually rolling dice, there was very specific sets of compounded commands that you could throw in after the roll command. And you can trigger a few exploding dice, stuff like that. I don't know if that actually ever got into the classic version of Fantasy Grounds or not, but that was something that Moon Wizard had been working on as part of his development process. Now that Unity is out, a lot of that functionality is now in place. So if you look in the bottom left here, where I have /roll 4d6d1, what I'm asking Fantasy Grounds to do is roll 4 die 6, drop the lowest dice. And it's just going to drop 1 dice. So if I click this 6 times, it should be doing this. It worked in my testing. Okay, I had to restart Fantasy Grounds in order to get the die roll to fix, so I just tested it. That'll be my first stat. So if I click this 5 more times, we'll see the stats. Now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there are 6 rolls there, and wow, that's actually some pretty decent rolls. But you'll notice that this grade dice here. What that means is that Fantasy Grounds has rolled the 46 and automatically dropped the lowest dice. And it's duplicate safe. So if you see here, there are 4 die. It only dropped 1 of them. It did not drop all of the 4 die, number 4s in that particular roll. What is it with the rolls that I'm getting an 8 here? Oh my. This will be interesting for this particular character. Alright, so we got a 15, a 17, a 15, an 8, a 17, and a 10. Now, a dexterity is going to be the rogue's primary roll, and all I have to do is just left click on this and drop it into the dexterity field, and it will automatically apply that number. Let's see, intelligence, I probably am going to want to be next. I always like a high constitution, and this character is going to get a bonus to their charisma, but thinking here. Okay, once again, we don't have an overly wise character. Now, do I want the 10 to go into charisma or in strength? So, generally, your strength isn't going to apply a whole lot to a rogue, because there's a very good chance the rogue is going to be using finesse weapons, which means you're going to be applying modifiers to your weapons based off of your dexterity stat, not based off of your strength stat like it used to work with 2nd edition, which is where I'm literally going from 2nd edition to 5th edition, so there's a big jump there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the 15 into charisma and drop the 10 there, although it's not going to change anything. Once again, I've got a character that cannot see in the dark. Passive perception is 9, so this particular character is not going to be great at looking for hidden artifacts, hidden doors, or anything like that. In fact, their detect trap skill might be a bit bit off. So let's see what we actually have for dexterity. So sleight of hand. Okay, no, so sleight of hand is actually fairly good. Investigation is good. So yes, they will be okay at that. Perception, however, is not great. They suffer in this particular case. So this could be a situation where I drop the level 4 ability modifier to bring that up to null out that negative balance there. But that's a decision we'll make later. I mean, maybe he gets a little wiser as he gains a little bit more experience, or she, depending on the race that I've chosen, or the sex that I've chosen for this character. I haven't decided that part yet. All right, so with that in mind, I'm going to drop the race onto this particular character sheet. And as you can see, all the these are all the things that the race, Tabaxi race, will drop onto the sheet. And now I do have dark vision, which is good. Dexterity is up to 19, which is great. But what that does mean is that when I do get the stat modifier at level 4, I can only use 1 point there out of the 2 that you could potentially use, which is not a bad thing because you can increase 1 stat by 2 stats by 1, or you can take a feat depending on whether the DM allows you to do that or not. Some of those feats can be actually quite powerful. And a rogue with alert, for example, nigh on impossible to roll bad when it comes to their initiative, although it is still possible. Now, this character can climb 20 feet, and that's because of the feline agility skill. All right, so I'm now going to drop the rogue into place. Now, the criminal background is going to give me deception and stealth, so I don't want to select those in this particular listing here, but let's see. I want to be... If I take perception, that might cancel out the negative for the rolls. Performance is probably useful. Definitely sleight of hand. So that leaves 1 more skill. Again, no, I'm going to change my mind on perception. I don't want this character to be the one that has to observe things. I'm hoping I get a character that gets a good wisdom. Generally, that would be the cleric, in my opinion. But so that leaves me with 2 left. So he's already going to get proficiency with stealth and deception. So I don't need to choose either of those 2. Okay, this would be a good character potentially to do that, but I'm going to make him proficient in investigation and acrobatics, because athletics is I believe actually both of these are strength. Nope, that one's a dexterity. This one is a strength. So that's another reason why you want to do this. You want to play against the strengths that you have there. Investigation should be intelligence. Performance should be charisma, which he's got a pretty decent charisma for. And sleight of hand should be dexterity. Yes. All right. So that chooses that. And now I'm going to drop the background into place. Okay. So, once again, you see that we have a maximum hit point count. He only gets a +2 to bonus, and rogues get a d8 for their rolls here. I'm going to select a portrait. Let's see. Are there any tabaxis? No, they're probably going to be under the... Isn't there? I don't know why they don't give you the ability to search. Like, it used to be that you could search portraits. Actually, you might not have ever been able to search portraits. Oh yeah, that's my new... Okay, what about in here? There we go. Finding a tabaxi picture is probably going to be pretty interesting. What's under here? Okay, and go back into here. So there's no racial specific tabaxi. That sort of looks cattish, but not quite. That'd be a ranger, paladin. I'm probably missing something obvious here. We'll go with this one. So we'll choose a female character. So 1 second, I'm going to pop open another window here. All right. I like that name. So all right. Next, we need to deal with the abilities, or the inventory rather. Okay. And sneak attack is highly useful. All right. So from a equipment weapons list here, we're going to get a rapier or a short sword. So I'm going to take a short sword, but is this one proficient in... Okay, so proficient specifically in short swords and in long swords. But I don't get to start with a long sword based on what I can see here. So I'm going to go with the short sword. Then go with short bow or another short sword. Good dexterity would imply that I should be able to hit fairly well with a short bow. So let's choose that. Oh, that's under... Where are you? There you are. Okay. Touch yours and explores back. I'm gonna go 2 daggers, some leather armor. So daggers. Now you can search here. So that's 1 and 2. And as you can see, they're finesse weapons, which means the dexterity would be applicable in all of these cases. So if I show you the short sword, you can see that it is also a finesse weapon. And if the character goes with a 2-handed skill, which I don't know if they can get right off, then because this is light, they should be able to use 2 light weapons for 2-handed fighting. All right, next would be the... Now, what about over here? Okay, so armor list. I'm going to go with the leather armor. Okay, and there's no disadvantage to stealth there. The adventuring gear. All right, so I want a quiver of arrows, and I generally give, I think it's under potentially tools. No, what do I hear? Yep, so there is a quiver. I forgot to give that to the fighter, so I can go fix that later. All right. What else? Done. That's now done. All right, so Dungeoneers or Explorers pack. So what's the Burglar's pack got in it? So once again, the burglar or the okay, let's go over. Okay, that applies. All right. Thieves' tools. That'll be under the tools group. Duh. All right, crowbar. Crowbar. Okay. Now that should have. Yep, there it is. Common clothes. Dark common clothes. And you can see here that there are no dark clothes. Those are, and you can see here under tools that there aren't any either. That is something that you as a player would customize. So common clothes including a hood. So this would be dark. Oops. I just did what I said not to do and hit the enter key. Created a new entry. And I don't believe a hood. Oops. Oh, that's lantern. Okay. And a belt pouch. I think we searched for this last time. Pouch. Okay, so there is a pouch. Okay, so that is actually 1 pound. I just got to correct that now on the fighter. I do believe I did not. Generally, you get a belt pouch. Okay, so that was 1 pound. All right. I should have given them the quiver anyway. And now for the tools. All right, so thieves tools. So you'll note here he gets thieves tools both from being a rogue as well as being a criminal. From my perspective as a DM, that's they null themselves out, so you get one, or they don't null themselves out, but essentially it means to me that you get one set. You don't get 2 sets. You get 1 set. So there's the thieves tools, and there. So your thieves tools come to play when you're actually trying to break into something or things like that. So it contains that equipment there. And you gain the ability to add your proficiency bonus as a result, but I do believe for a rogue that's automatically calculated. For other classes, it may not necessarily be calculated, so it may be something that you have to look into. All right, now the abilities. We get choice and common. Now, I didn't show you where to get the languages last time, but a good example, or a good location, which you can't choose from there, so that's not going to work, is go into the player's handbook, reference manual, and use the word or search for languages. Languages. Or just search for lang. And interestingly enough, they don't have that. That seems confusing to me. Might still be. Oh, I know why. I forgot to expand it. There we go. Yeah, if you don't expand it, it won't search. So languages. There are 2 sets of languages. These are the common ones that players will be able to select from generally, and I'm just going to close that in the window in the background. But for a character who's gone through additional schooling, these would be applicable, in my opinion, or has had access to them. For example, in the case of a cleric, you might be able to give them celestial based on, or abyssal, based on the type of religion that they were actually going through, maybe even infernal, because the cleric is going to be praying as part of that process, but there is admittedly an educational process through that whole thing, whereas a rogue might be self-taught across the board and has grown up as a result of that. So the odds are they are not going to be fluent in any of these, but would not be out of the question for them to be fluent with, let's see, I'm going to go with Gnomish in this case. And the reason I say that is because it's possible that as a rogue you would have had to offense an item that you'd stolen, and that may not necessarily be a human or a dwarf or it could be a hoblin, maybe, but most likely it could be a goblin or a gnome. Not saying that gnomes are all rogues, but every campaign I've ever played in, the gnome was always a rogue, so I don't know. All right, and then you just can close that out. So that's how you can actually get at the languages section. And that's a common. Okay, and what I will do is I will go on to the next one, and then I'll go through and link everything into place for this character. And when I get to one of the items that is a bit tricky, for instance, the Master of... where was that? That was under the other one. I'll come back to that one. Master of Tactics, that's what it was. Then I'll go through and add that, but I think we get to that a little bit later on anyway. I don't think you got this right off. No. Okay. So it might be something that you can choose later on. All right, so for now, I'm going to leave this character, and I'm going to look at creating the next character. So give me a minute, and I will be right back. All right, so the next character is going to be a Dwarven Cleric who has the Sage background. And you'll note that there's a Hill Dwarf here, and that's because dwarves have something called a subrace. Currently, there is a mountain and a Hill Dwarf when it comes to just the standard player's handbook, but there are additional subraces that are included with some of the other supplements. So, this one, now I'll show you what I mean by that. So, under the Dungeon Master's Guide, there's the Death domain. Oh, sorry, that's the Cleric. I didn't want the class, I wanted the race. Duh. And this guy is going to be of the Life domain. So, Sword Coast Adventurers Guide. This subrace supplies these three. And that would be an underground race, similar to the Drow in where they live. But generally, okay, that one's a strength increase. Gold Dwarf is a wisdom. So Gold Dwarves and the Hill Dwarves are more or less the same thing. So I'm going to choose a Gold Dwarf out of this. So they both get Dwarven Toughness, I believe. Yes, so they're very similar. So I'm going to use something from the Fantasy Grounds, or Forgotten Realms location. There is also the Mordenkainen one, who introduces the Durgar in more detail, rather than just a Grey Dwarf. Alright, so, let's close that and that. I'm pretty certain that is the Player's Handbook one, but I just want to make sure. Alright. Alright, so, okay, so I've chosen the subrace. Now, the reason why I'm choosing a particular race that has a subrace is to show you how that process works. Thus far, I have selected a Dragonborn and a Tabaxi, neither of which have subraces defined as of this point in time. So I wanted to show off the subrace for the dwarves. I was thinking maybe elf either as well, but in this case, I think a dwarf makes a little bit more sense for a clerical perspective, whereas an elf makes a little bit more sense when it comes to just raw magical power. And we'll go from there. So, once again, I'm going to roll my statistics. So, and it has broken again. So, let me do this. I'm just going to clear. I'm not sure why that happens. And why clears that. D1. Boom. So, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wow. This is going to be one mediocre party. 12 and 11. So, from a clerical perspective, the primary stats typically are wisdom and charisma, I believe, but it does show you up here. Right, so on the cleric class page, I should say, not just the cleric page, but this isn't specific to just clerics, this is across the board. You'll see a quick build reference in a lot of cases, and the suggestions will give you your priority stats in order. Wisdom, strength, and then constitution. Wisdom is a cleric's spellcasting ability, so it makes sense for that particular character to have a high wisdom, which is a no-brainer in this case, so he's actually got a positive perception level. What else is there? His strength is also going to go to a 13. I'm going to put a 12 in his dex and his constitution. I'm going to put a 12. This is one flat. Flat dwarf when it comes to his stats. Alright, so the minute I drop this into place, it's going to pop with this. And it's going to show you all of the options, and you click on these to get to all of them. So as long as the DM has a particular module enabled, it will present with you this particular option. But you'll also notice that under the dwarf, there is an ability score increase at time of selection that is the Constitution. It hasn't gone up yet, and that's because this, I believe, overrides that. Oh no, in this case it did. So did not. So in this case, I now have a Constitution of 14 and a Wisdom of 14. So you do still get the base stat, and then it's the subrace that gives you your additional one. So if you recall, when I chose these two, there was a something score increases. In this case, it was strength for the Dragonborn, and then charisma is increased by 1 or something like that. There was always 2 stats. The dwarf, base dwarf, will affect the core stat, and then your subrace will affect the other stat. And it's always good to align that subrace with what you're going to be using for your actual class in a lot of cases. And it becomes interesting to roleplay if you don't. But generally, when you want to play a mind campaign, that's probably what you'll want to do. But then we're getting into min-maxing. And as you can see, this is not a maxed out character. Mediocre stats all across. Oh my. This cleric is going to be a little bit more perceptive than the rest of the group, but is not going to have an overly good time when it comes to avoiding spells and stuff like that. Passing checks, possibly. Yeah. Okay. So, I'm then going to drop the clerical background. Now, unlike the other classes, I believe the clerics actually get their archetype right off the get-go, because they have to understand that right off the get-go. So, Arcana and History. So, I don't want to select History here. This guy's going to be the healer. And makes sense for him to understand religion. Yes, so I'm going to choose Life Domain. Now, Life Domain is what you will be able to cast when it comes to spells. So these are all of the spells that are Life Domain specific, but there are others that are not generally tied to a given domain. So this one's going to be the healer for the party. Typical healer in reference to that. Now, in this case, I will get to the life domain in a moment. So I'm going to get ready to do the backgrounds. Now, how many spells am I going to get? So first level, I get 2, but there's also a modifier. So what you want to look for is typically there is a level, had a level passed when it comes to your spells, and that might be under the life domain, or it's going to be under spell casting in general in this case. So this will always link you to your class specific spellcasting features and provide you a link to clerical spells, which we will get to in a moment. All right, so preparing. How many spell slots do we get? We got 2. Okay. First level and higher. Cast blah, blah, blah. So a cleric, in case you didn't know, has the ability to prepare, or know rather, pretty much all of the spells that they have available to them. It's what they choose to prepare that they have to determine that during a long rest. You can't change that during a short rest. And in this case, it's a wisdom modifier plus your clerical level. So the wisdom modifier is plus 2, and your level is this. So you know 3 spells in this particular case that you can prepare. And they have to be of the same a level that you have spell slots for. So for example, and they provide you an example on giving the math. Okay, so I'm going to come back to choosing the spells in a moment. I'm going to first drop in the inventory, and then I will be right back. Okay, so there's one thing I wanted to point out in relation to the inventory for a cleric. With 5th edition, spells can be cast in one of 2 modes. They can be cast with the reagents, which means you'd have to be carrying around a spell belt pouch with all of your spell components in it. Or you can use something called an arcane focus. In this case, if you'll see here, there's a holy symbol option. So the 5th edition player's handbook guides you towards using a holy symbol, and really only falling back to reagents when a particular spell requires it. And you can tell when there's a $ value next to an item in that particular spell. And I'll see if I can't find an example. If not, I'm sure we'll find one at some point. Now, for a cleric, that means that there are 3 options I can choose from. Not sure why you would choose a reliquary. Excuse me. I suppose it could be a statue of some kind or anything, but generally I like to play with an amulet. So I'm just going to go with that. It could be an emblem on the cloak or something along those lines as well. But I just wanted to point that out before I finish getting into the spells here. So I'm just about done with the inventory, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back, and I've got everything done for his inventory here. The Sage background requires a letter from a dead colleague, but obviously that's not an item. So that's this and the quill are the 2 items I had to create manually. But when it comes to the spells, you're going to want to do a couple of things. You're going to want to look at your domain spells. So the domain that you chose, in this case I chose the life domain. These would be the first ones that I would consider. The whole purpose of this particular dwarf is to help the party survive. So I'm going to just simply drag and drop, and I'm not sure why that is doing that. There seem to be a few issues with this update that I'm hoping are going to be fixed soon. And as you can see, it has added those 2 spells there. But because I have the option of having a 3rd spell, and it didn't really say how many cantrips I got. So cleric, how many cantrips do I get? First, second, third. So cantrips, I get 3 cantrips. So that would be the other thing. So you get to choose 3 cantrips in this guy. I'm going to choose guidance, mending, and you know what? I'm going to get rid of mending because I want spare the dying and a sacred flame. All right, and I still get one more first level spell here. So I'm going to go with healing word. That gets more powerful as you level up. All right, so he's primarily going to be or she, I haven't decided yet, is primarily going to be a melee weapon. I've selected a mace in this case because she's not proficient yet with a warhammer. And these are the cantrips that I've chosen, as well as the spells. Now, if you recall from the Dragonborn character, I had to type in a few things here. And that allowed me to categorize things. But when it comes to spells, they're actually self bucketing, if you will, in the sense that it will know what level that particular spell is, and it will drop it into the appropriate zone. That way, if you want to know, or if you know you want to get to your first level spells, you just simply minimize all your other windows or categories, if you will, and then you can choose from your spells here. And again, when you're in a combat situation, you want to change these 2 to the point where you're actually seeing it. Now you notice I don't have anything prepared, so it is not allowing me to cast anything. So that's where this comes into play. And I know I can choose a few other spells here, but that's all I'm going to go with for now, just to make my life simpler for this. Now, if I switch to combat, I now have the option to choose these. And the cantrips are always there because they're always prepared. They're always available to you. And I did not choose. I did choose a Sacred Flame here, just in the off chance that he or she loses his weapon. He's at least got this that he can use. Okay, that is how to deal with a cleric and the subrace aspect of things. So the next one, I'm probably going to do at a later date. It is a bit more complicated, so I'm still sorting out whether I want to go with a warlock, a mage, a sorcerer, a wizard, or anything like that. Because sorcerers and warlocks have a different method of doing things, and whereas a mage is fairly straightforward. It's very similar to what I just did with the cleric, except selecting the spells is a little bit different. Because they can only have a maximum number of spells that you can even own off the get-go. Whereas a cleric, they can theoretically pray to their god and completely change out their spell listing, and then just simply prepare the ones that they wish to choose. So a cleric doesn't behave like, oh, I have to have 3 spells and I can prepare 3 spells, or I know 4 spells and prepare 3 spells. You're aware of all of the other spells, and during a long rest you can switch them out, but you can only prepare 3 of them at a time. And that's where you do your swapping out of spells. So I'm going to pause the recording here. It may be a later date before I come back to the wizard once I've settled on the option that I'm going to choose for that, because I'm looking for something that's going to be doing a little bit of range to DPS from a spell perspective, and I think a sorcerer or warlock might apply there, but I may just simply go with the mage or the wizard. So we'll see. But I will come back once I have that done. All right, before I move on to the wizard, I just wanted to point out 2 things. When it comes to dwarves, there's a good chance that they have the dwarven combat training. So with that, you do gain proficiency with a battle axe, a hand axe, blade hammer, and a warhammer. So theoretically, I could change the mace here out for a warhammer, and I may in fact do that before I get to the mage. The other thing that I wanted to point out is under the notes field, there is a deity tab. And in order to get to that, you need to go and open up the reference manual for the player's handbook again, expand out the list, and then search for deity. And what that will do is that will bring up this option here, Gods of the Multiverse. And there's a massive list of gods here that you can choose from. Generally, you want to try to line up a domain with the domain your cleric has chosen. Now, it's going to be a bit odd for me in this case, but a gold dwarf is very much going to be able to worship Shantia in this case, in the case of the Forgotten Realms, which is what I'm basing this campaign out of. But it is also possible that they would be a god of Helm. In fact, I'm actually going to choose Helm because that would explain the Warhammer. He's generally pretty good with that. And Ilmater, no, that's generally... And Lathander, I suppose that could be a good one as well. But I'm going to choose Helm in this particular case. And go for that case. And so this is literally just so that the DM knows what deity your dwarf or elf or human or whatever race you have decided to choose actually worships, for the purposes of role-playing some functionality in the place of a cleric, for example. There could be areas where you get tied off from being able to communicate with your particular deity, and he or she will need to be able to know, oh, you're now in an area where your calls to Helm don't seem to be coming through. Things like that. Now, granted, in the more modern time frames of Forgotten Realms, I don't believe the gods actually interact directly with the people that worship them anymore. I think they've been a lot more standoffish than they usually had been prior to 5th edition coming out. So I'm not entirely certain yet how that would play out in a particular campaign for some people. But I just wanted to point those 2 things out before I moved on to the Spellcaster. Okay.